Good evening and welcome to Crossfire. Women in combat? In the wake of the Gulf War, where 35,000 women served in the field, is it an idea whose time has come, or an idea whose time should never come to a civilized society? Well, the issue is here. The House has voted to permit women combat pilots in both the Air Force and Navy, and the Senate will take the matter up within weeks. A good idea or a dreadful idea? Michael?
Phyllis Schlafly, the women who served in Operation Desert Storm believe that they served bravely and served well for their country. Do you disagree?
Well, of course, this wasn't really combat, you know, where the casualty rate was 1,000 to 1. It was, as what one soldier called, a turkey shoot. But this is just a terrible idea, because what it would mean would be...
You sound like these worst kind of anti-war hippies like me and Pat here.
No, I don't think we can call it a real combat test. But anyway, this idea to put women as the flyers is an affirmative action quota plan for women in which they would not be competing equally with men. They would only be competing with each other for affirmative action female slots.
Oh, wait.
And then, let me tell you, once they get this $1 million training to be a pilot, then when a nasty old war comes along, every one of them would have the right and option to say, well, hello, fellas, I'm just going to take 9 months out to be pregnant and another 3 months to have a baby, and you guys take care of the nasty fighting, and I'll see you all in a year.
So you sound, wait a minute, I'm confused. You sound like you're arguing that women wouldn't really fight in combat after all. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I say they've got the option. And
if they wouldn't, then there's no problem. If they would, then the problem's your problem.
The trouble is they would have the option, and you cannot give that option to men.
Wait a minute, I don't understand. As I understand this argument about women pilots, there's all the issues that are usually raised about women in combat don't apply. There's no question of sharing latrines, sharing tents. There's no question of brute strength. Tests show that women can fly a plane just as skillfully as a man. And presumably the same rules would apply to them as apply to men. So what's the problem?
But you haven't addressed the pregnancy and the baby question. And every one of them under military policy today has got the right to say, pardon me, boys, I'm going to take 9 months out.
Your problem is not, once again, just to get this on down, your problem isn't that women might actually be fighting in combat. Your problem seems to be that women might get out of fighting in combat.
My problem is that...
Do you have any objection to women actually fighting?
My problem is that it isn't fair. It isn't just. When the women have the option to say, I've had all the peacetime training, I've had your $1 million testing training, but now
so
that
you
it's come
don't
along,
object to women
out.
Actually fighting?
I think there's no way to make it equal.
You're worried that they'll just get out of it?
I object that it's not equal.
I do object to it. General Vaught, let me ask you, we pay $1 million to train a fighter pilot. What about Phyllis's point? You pay this $1 million and the fighter pilot comes to you just as she and others are about to be sent abroad, and she says, I'm pregnant, I'm sorry, I want to keep the baby.
Well, I would respond to that by saying, what do you do about that male fighter pilot who comes in and he's broken his leg? You don't send him that way. You wait till he's ready to go.
The male fighter pilot can't get pregnant.
No, he can't get pregnant, but there are lots of things he does, and when you look at lost time, women have far lost time than men do in the military services.
General Vaught, some 10%, I believe, of the women in various services are pregnant at any one time. Training a fighter pilot takes over $1 million.
But more people than that, and I'm not just talking pilot specific, a greater percentage of the men are losing time than the women are. And let's just look at what the record really shows, and that is that when the women were called on in Desert Storm, Desert Shield, as they have all the time when they've been called upon, the women pilots, navigators, crew members, they responded, they were there, they met their requirements.
All right, but no Air Force in the world has women pilots. We have, it is argued...
Not so.
Fighter pilots. We have, it is argued, the finest Air Force in the world, the most capable fighter planes, and the best pilots. We are #1. This isn't a game they're playing. It is war. We won it hands down. Why change a winning game for some sociological experiment?
Oh, I don't think we're changing it for a sociological experiment. I think we're changing it because it makes sense. It's good use of our limited resources. It's good use of the training that we're giving people. Further, it's not we're not the only ones. The Russians used women fighter pilots and bomber pilots during in World War II.
General Vaught, you know as well as I do.
The Netherlands right now are using them, and the Canadians are using them.
You know as well as I do right now that in the service academies, in order to keep the women there, and at Paris Island, they have shifting standards. They have one for the men, one for the women. I was at Paris Island and watched these with Ronald Reagan when he did his tour, and you watch these fellows crawl up a 35-foot tower and come down a big rope forward, crawling on it. They had to have tremendous upper body strength to do it. A lot of them just dropped into the creek. There weren't any women on that particular tour. There are different standards at the Naval Academy, different at West Point.
Do you need to be able to climb a 35-foot wall and slide down a rope in order to fly a plane, Phyllis?
You need to treat them all equally, or it isn't fair. And we know the truth about this affirmative action because of the West Point colonel who testified in the Virginia Military Institute trial. And he confirmed that they have double standards for men and women, that the women do not pass the same physical tests, and if they take the same ones, they get a higher score for doing the same thing. So they actually have affirmative action slots for women, and the women do not compete with the men.
These aren't affirmative action slots. These are slots that the women have qualified for because they're able to meet the requirements of the job. You know, for not every job that you do in the military service do you have to be able to do the same things.
Doesn't that make sense? Doesn't that make sense?
It doesn't make sense.
Shouldn't you have objective standards? Let's get right to the question of combat. You design a set of rules. Yes, you probably do need upper body strength to be a good soldier. Most men can probably meet an objective test. Most women maybe can't meet an objective test. But have an objective test. Treat people as individuals instead of treating them as members of groups. I thought that's what you conservatives want in America.
But that won't work because we know the military is not telling us the truth about it. And you know good and well, Michael, that the only news we got about the Gulf War was what the military chose to give us. And we know that the Colonel, Colonel Toffler, said that a lower-class woman is allowed at West Point to correct her superiors if he says something like chairman, whereas the men, if they make anything negative about women, that is, as the New York Times said Sunday, a career killer. So the men are not allowed to tell the truth.
We're not taking in a lower class of women at the academies. The women at the academies are able to do better physically than the men did 10 or 20 years ago.
Oh,
but they're not competing with the men.
General, look, I'll bet those men can probably do 50 push-ups, and how many women do you know could do it?
I mean, those women at the academy can do 50 push-ups.
But they can't.
Do you need to do 50 push-ups in order to fly a plane? That's the question on the table.
Let me talk about the plane, Michael. The pilots, listen, these pilots that are in combat pilots are some of the best athletes America's got. They are tough. They are aggressive. The idea that you women can compete on a par with them is ludicrous. You know as well as I, General, you would have to lower the
General was in the Air Force.
Pat, one of the things that I find just exceedingly interesting is I look at what women can and can't do, or what women are permitted to do or not permitted to do, is to go back to World War II, when planes were much more difficult to fly than they are today. And who was out there ferrying planes? Our women. And they were 5'2", and they weighed about 90 to 120 pounds. Didn't have a bit of trouble. But you know, aggressiveness and ability.
Let's take high school football teams in America where you got 20,000 kids. Speed, stamina, aggressiveness, toughness. There's probably not 10 women in America that could play high school football.
Well, have the objective test, but if they lose the test, fair enough, but don't rule them out just because of their sex.
Oh, but the military is not giving an objective test, and we know good and well that they are not telling us the truth. It's just like, now wait a minute.
If there was,
it's just like, no, now wait a minute. It's not if. We talk about the way things really are, and it's not objective, and it's not truthful.
Well, Phyllis, why don't you campaign to make the test objective? Why don't you campaign to make sure that women fight in combat?
It's just like in the other colleges.
You're not really being.
Listen, Michael. It's just like in the colleges, we all know that they've got minority quotas, but when somebody dared to tell the truth about it at Georgetown, the whole thing broke loose, and everybody said, but it's the same thing about the military, because even the New York Times says that it's a career killer for any officer.
As the one of us, the four of us who's been in the military services, the tests are objective, and the women do meet their qualifications, and the women perform magnificently.
But
well, under oath,
Secretary Cheney
said they don't.
But General, you're not telling. I mean, it is not true. The tests are not the same at Paris Island. They are not the same at the Naval Academy. They are not the same at West Point.
And I would say let's change them so they are the same, because I believe if you can't meet the test, you shouldn't do the thing, whatever it is. But let's be sure the tests are realistic, that we don't just set
well, what you're saying is let's reduce, don't make it abnormally high.
Make it realistic.
Make it realistic.
All right.
Lower the standards.
These two guys will settle this while we take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the country's reaction to the women who were killed and held prisoner in the Gulf War and whether it was different from what many people suspected. Welcome back to Crossfire. We're talking about women at war. The rules say no women in combat, but 35,000 women served in Operation Desert Storm, and modern warfare doesn't make it easy to define what's combat and what isn't. Scud missiles don't know the difference. Some people say that's a good reason to let women play any military role they're capable of. Others say it's a better reason to keep America's mothers and future mothers back home and out of danger. We're debating all this with Air Force Brigadier General Wilma Vaught, retired, who heads the effort to build a memorial to the women who've died defending their country, and Phyllis Schlafly, founder of the Eagle Forum, syndicated columnist, radio commentator, and probably America's best-known anti-feminist. Phyllis, before the war in the Persian Gulf, a lot of people said, when women start dying and being taken prisoner, this country is going to be traumatized. Now, it happened in Operation Desert Storm. Obviously, no one liked it, but there really wasn't much of a fuss. People's attitude seemed to be these women are in the same position as men who volunteer for military service. Did that reaction surprise you?
Well, that's because there are only a couple of women who died and were taken prisoner. But you did see an outrage about the mothers of babies who were sent out to the Gulf. And the Associated Press poll showed that the American public, by 2-to-1, thought that was an asinine policy.
Well, there's a very simple solution to that. It has nothing to do with whether women are in combat or not. Simply give couples who are both serving an option that one of them, and they can choose which one, can stay home. What's wrong with that?
The military policy. The military policy was after 6 weeks, a mother's fully deployable. So they sent out mothers of 6, 8, 10-week-old babies,
Phyllis,
dragged them away.
Everyone agrees, even the military, that policy should be re-examined. That doesn't have anything to do with women in combat.
No, they haven't. They've been trying to devise some type of a sex-neutral.
What's wrong with that? Why shouldn't the parents be able to decide among themselves which one goes and which one stays home? Why isn't it their business and not your business?
Why are you so angry, Michael?
Because you're...
Listen,
Michael, calm down.
The problem is mothers. Yes, calm down, Michael.
Why isn't it the family's business and not Phyllis Schlafly's business? Which one of them goes, Phyllis? That's the question.
It was the mother. It was the problem of the mother of a little baby. And it was up to the services.
And it should be up to the services and the mothers. It should be up to the services and the mothers. You know, one of the things that the services require is that we have adequate family plans, and our military people do that. And the services exercise compassion entirely through this entire period of time.
Oh, compassion. Compassion. They sent mothers of 6, 8, and 10-week-old babies out to the Gulf.
General Vaught, in our society, one of the reasons why people object to the position taken by Michael here is in our society, like it or not, a man who lets his woman do the fighting for him is considered a coward. The idea of sending a nursing mother off to the desert to drive a truck rather than have her there with her child is profoundly offensive. Women and children first is almost written into the conscience of the American people. Is there something wrong with those convictions?
Just because it's written into our consciousness doesn't mean it has to be that way. If a woman is fully capable of doing a job in the military services, and that's what she chooses to do, and remembering that we are in the all-volunteer force days, then she should be permitted to do that.
Question. If the woman has, just as Phyllis suggests, we happen to have a period when the woman has it, 15% of them or 10% are pregnant, she has a baby, the baby is 8 or 9 weeks old, she's called up by Desert Storm to go drive a truck and carry artillery shells up to the front. What should she be doing? Should she be there with that child right there driving a truck when somebody else could drive the car?
That should be up to her and up to her service.
Well, it's not. It should be. This is a political decision for the United States of America,
no,
and we think we are entitled to know what happened to those mothers of 6 and 10-week-old babies who were sent over, and what happened to the baby. And we haven't found out.
Wait a minute.
Just excuse me. And we haven't found out because the military is to this day not willing to tell us how many mothers of little babies were in the Gulf War. A simple fact that they must know on their computer. They won't even tell.
Let's talk about who was sent home or who didn't go, because that's what this whole issue is about. You know, the largest number of people who didn't go were men, and they were men who had what you might call hip pocket physicals that disqualified them from serving in a place like Desert Storm or serving overseas. And when they didn't want to go, out they came with this piece of paper that said, hey, I can't go. That's who the most of them were who didn't go. You know, of those who deployed and were sent home, 1/10 of 1%, and that's both men and women, were sent back, and that was an insignificant number.
Phyllis, I want to ask you, you believe that the women should stay home, take care of their children, and be the mothers.
Now look, Michael,
and that's right, that's fine.
Don't put words in my mouth.
No,
I believe that pregnancy and motherhood are incompatible with military service.
Fine.
Well, but nobody's addressed this.
Fine. I want to ask a related question, though. Many women, for whatever reason, that option is not available, or they did not take that option. They are not going to be pregnant. They are not going to be mothers. They are not going to have families. They find service in the military a way to have a fulfilling life, to serve their society. Don't you have some sympathy with their desire to find some role for themselves? And
I don't have any problem with that at all. I have a problem with the military taking this nutty idea that pregnancy and motherhood are compatible with military service, and they'll just kind of pretend it isn't there.
So if a woman isn't married,
so when the ship arrives at San Diego and it's got 36 crew members who are pregnant, and another ship arrives and there are 20 crew members who are pregnant.
People get pregnant, women get pregnant all of the time.
Yeah, but not
that
when
was
you're
a very
fighting
small number. They were pregnant. Most of them were pregnant before they ever left on that ship. The issue should
why
be,
did they send them
did
then?
they do their jobs? The women didn't even realize at that time they were pregnant. Did they do their job? And the answer to that is yes, they did.
But we don't know because the military won't tell us.
We're going to continue.
Yes, we know.
We come back. We're going to continue this issue of the love boats of Desert Storm in a moment. General, as you know, 2 armies in World War II and beyond have used military women in combat roles, the Israelis and the Soviets, and both have deliberately discontinued the policy. No nation that I know of now uses women as its fighter pilots. Isn't there some wisdom in the experience of the race here that shouldn't be overruled by some sociological experiment?
I don't think this is a sociological experiment. I think it's reality. I think it is a healthy thing to have all of our citizens want to be able to defend the country. I strongly believe that. And I believe that it is better to have a person who volunteers to serve and serves than to go out and draft somebody or bring somebody in who serves unwillingly.
But you don't think that, do you don't believe that sex has anything to do in determining the type of role people play in the military and combat?
It shouldn't. It should have nothing to play with whether people are qualified or not qualified to do something.
You know,
further, wait a minute, back to your issue that no country is using its women in combat. The Netherlands, Denmark, now England,
going to war.
Canada, all of these countries.
You can use one in Denmark because they're not going to fight anybody.
You don't know. Using it. She says,
don't know.
You know, it's very funny to hear Pat citing the Soviets as a source of wisdom, Phyllis.
They stopped. They stopped using it.
That's my point. And you said that doesn't that show the collective wisdom of the race?
The record is that the women did extraordinarily well.
When Canada applied equal testing to the males and females, the women couldn't cut it, and they gave it up.
Cut it. Well,
no,
nearly all. Only one passed. But at any rate, you know, Michael, that this whole push is by women officers who want their affirmative action quota. It is not pushed by the enlisted women. You can hardly find any enlisted woman who wants to be in the combat infantry.
I talked to a fellow who's got a son who was in Desert Storm, and he did run artillery shells up to the front. And he said they just disparaged the women. Anytime you had a flat tire, the men would have to come along and repair the flat tire, and the women sit there and watch them. Just on construction work, they're the ones that hold the sign that says, come on by, while these guys are shoveling gravel.
That may have happened in some isolated case. All I can say is that the total record, the women were in there doing what they were supposed to be doing.
And
the enlisted women, and I have talked to the enlisted women, and they support this legislation.
Yes,
I'm not going to say every single one does.
Let me ask you one last question because we're running out of time. Police and firefighters in this country also risk their lives regularly to keep the nation safe and secure. Should women be banned from those occupations as well?
Well, if they're held to the same tests as men for the firefighters, you won't find very many women who will qualify. And the biggest point about this is the military is lying to us. They have double standards for men and women, and if they applied the same tests, you wouldn't find many women who would qualify.
We're out of time.